So Wikipedia defines a supercar as a very fast and expensive sports car. We like to throw the term around, but what really is a supercar? And do we need terms like hypercar to define some of the modern technological marvels that we are seeing coming out of some of these shops? That's today. What is a supercar on After Drive? So today on After Drive, we are remembering the hundreds and hundreds of people killed in bar fights arguing over what constitutes a supercar and whether the term hypercar actually needs to exist. We're going to try to run down all of the reasons why it should or should not exist and what is a supercar. Today here on After Drive, we've got Matt Hardigree from Jalopnik, editor-in-chief, and Raphael Orlove, straight from Ellis Island, apparently, writer of Jalopnik. Thanks for showing up, and your socks with shoes on them are really a nice touch.
Yes.
All of our writers, I insist, on being very well dressed. Not me anymore, but the rest of them.
I have to say, no, really, you have a very swarthy appearance. And
I don't think swarthy is the word that you meant to use there, but I'll go with it.
You're
swarthy?
Cutting, swarthy. You're
is
cutting,
that a word that's applied to anything other than pirates?
I don't know. Pirates have scurvy. You're confusing me.
I love that you're giving compliments, and I love your haircut, by the way.
Thanks. Thanks very much.
Do the other Indigo girls miss you?
Oh, damn. And that's it on After Drive. We'll see you guys later.
We're done.
All right. So what is
Everyone
a supercar? Carlos, what's your name?
Raphael. Raul.
All right, so let's talk about why we're talking about this today. Matt, this is actually your
this
idea.
is my fault. We were trying to put together the Jalopnik review leaderboard to explain our arcane numbering process.
Yeah.
And we were breaking things down into categories, and someone was like, "Oh, 12C, that's a supercar," and we haven't reviewed a hypercar yet. And Raphael was like, "No, it is not a supercar.
Yep.
That is a sports car." And then it
Right.
launched into a 6-hour argument. I got stabbed. It was a thing.
Well, the thing about this whole argument in general is that, I tend to not want to add words to the language, right? So supercar seems fine to me. But then when you think about the capabilities of cars these days, and then you look at how many cars are over $1 million and what technological prowess people are bringing to them, I'm starting to feel like you have to have a separate term like hypercar to describe it. So let's kind of go through what constitutes a supercar and what's the baseline. If we can establish a baseline, maybe we could kind of move from there. So, Raph, you're the...
Well, I always define them sort of relatively. Sort of a supercar is sort of almost not so much a supercar, rather an other car. It is something that is so just different from whatever you see on the road that, when you look at it, it's just utterly mind-blowing in the way you see it.
Okay, that's a completely sort of meaningless definition. So,
Philosophical definition.
But no, but it's a little bit too philosophical because we asked. Well, let's just put it out there. We asked you guys what you thought, and while a lot of you guys had some interesting things to say, which we're going to talk about right now, generally the thread is kind of incoherent because everybody has a different opinion, and nobody can really put it together.
but
so maybe we can't put it together, but maybe we can.
People are confused about what supercars are, and people have been confused by what supercars are. And I'm here to just sort of organize, set things straight.
No, so by your definition, a Nissan Juke, the first time you see it, is a supercar
no, not at all,
because it is the other.
It has elements of superness in it, but it's not a real proper.
What is your favorite supercar? This is how we have to get at it. We have to categorize it. What is a supercar?
Yeah, this makes you sound like a pretentious jerk because I am, but it would probably be a Lamborghini Countach LP400, the early ones.
So I took down a couple of viewer responses, right? So I think that these guys, in trying to define what a supercar or a hypercar is, came up with some pretty good terms, right? So a supercar or a hypercar. So let's leave the definition of whether we should have the term hypercar and let's just put those two categories together. So a supercar should use 100% of your skills as a driver. Hypercars lead, supercars follow, or you could say supercars lead, sports cars follow. There's a trickle-down aspect, is the point of that. A supercar wants to kill you, and I think the point of this one is that a supercar is not as accessible as the best sports cars are. In other words, sports cars have become so accessible to getting the performance out of them. So you can get behind the wheel of a Porsche Turbo and hit 200 miles an hour without a whole lot of skills, right? There's a sense of craft to a supercar. In other words, there's somebody behind. Maybe they're not pounding out fenders like Ferrari did, but there is a sense of handmade things. They're also impractical and ungodly fast. These are sort of relative terms, but you know, take that any way you want it. Hypercar means the absolute extreme, the height of technology, and a limited run. So technology being a strong part of it, and very few, so not as very exclusive to people with a bunch of money. So we'll throw that out there. Not to judge people with money, but
Of course not.
yeah. Perfect balance between weight, engine, and suspension. In other words, there's no compromising for the marketplace. And the last one, no boundaries, as good as a car can be. Again, no compromises for marketing purposes or anything else. It's like, this is the best stuff that we did, and the best stuff anyone could do, the best engineering, the best technology, and there aren't any compromises. So,
Yeah, but by almost every one of those definitions, you just described the Tesla Model S. So if you go through it, Tesla Model S is not a supercar.
well, okay, but there are boundaries to a Tesla Model S, right? So the boundaries are that
About 300 miles.
well, exactly. Well, that's one of them. But the other one is that it needs to seat 4 people, and it has to be, a comfortable daily use car, right? It can't have a carbon fiber tub, because ultimately, if you get into a fender bender at the supermarket, you're going to have to fix it.
Okay, well, what about a Lotus Elise? A Lotus Elise is also a lot of those things. It's great. It's fantastic. There's not a lot of technology in it, but it demands the most of the driver.
Mm-hmm.
There are no compromises for marketability, which is why Lotus is constantly going out of business or on the verge of going out of business.
Right.
So a Lotus Elise is sort of a supercar too. So this is what I like that the drive viewers, I agree that they're staying away from numbers, because numbers throw the whole game off.
Yeah.
Because you have 800, a Cadillac CTSV is 556 horsepower, and there are a lot of cars in that space. So like a CTSV wagon's not a supercar, but it's fan-freaking-tastic.
Right.
And then on the other hand, you have, like something rare and relatively low volume would be a Nissan Murano Cross Cabriolet. So you have these there's the problem with defining all of these things is it's like pornography. So this comes back to the civil rights, the Supreme Court case over pornography. It's like Justice Frankfurter said, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it.
Right.
So I know a supercar when I see it, whereas a hypercar, I think, is a greater debate, because I think we would all agree a 458 is a sports car. We would disagree loudly if a Ferrari F12 Berlinetta is a supercar. I agree it is, but
No, not even a
he does
little
not
bit.
agree that it is, because he's crazy. But like a hypercar, I think, is a technological thing. I think that's probably the smartest thing that was said there, because I think that the McLaren P1, the Porsche 918, and I'm missing one.
Porsche 918.
LaFerrari?
The LaFerrari.
Yeah.
The LaFerrari are the 3 legitimate hypercars, and nothing else that I've seen is a hypercar.
So Pagani, for example, right? So Pagani has a certain amount of artistry to building it, but it does have a fairly, standard engine, right? I mean, it's a great engine.
Yeah, but it's
a
big AMG
sports car
engine, yeah.
engine. It's an AMG engine, but the rest of it, though, if you look at the use of carbon fiber and aerodynamics.
It's much more bespoke than something like a old 288 GTO.
You just said a good word, bespoke, right? So is
thrown around way too often.
a supercar bespoke in a way that there's a custom aspect to it? There's a in other words, you get a suit made for you. You get a supercar, or you get a hypercar made for you, or a supercar. You get a
A hypercar is, so this is where a hypercar is different. A supercar is made for you. It's why a Nissan GTR is not a supercar. Like, even though it's faster than a lot of what we would consider supercars, like, you know, for 100 grand, any putz can buy like a GTR.
Right.
And it's like every other GTR that comes out, which is what you don't get with a hypercar. So if it's a hand-built supercar, it's like blueprinted. Like, there's some large...
And you can't buy one.
Oh,
like,
you can't buy.
You
You
can't
have
buy
to
a
know.
LaFerrari.
Yeah, you have to
like
know
you have
somebody.
to buy like 8 Ferraris, and then they're like, "We'll think about it."
Right. Well, that's Ferrari though that does that.
Porsche's like that too. Well, Porsche with the 918 because they haven't sold as much. McLaren P1, you kind of have to know. All of these cars, you kind of have to know somebody.
Right.
Which is not the same for a supercar or sports car. Any putz can also buy a 458.
That's not necessarily true. Any putz can buy a, not to say Lamborghini and McLaren are lesser cars necessarily, but anyone they will take your money and give you a car. Ferrari won't even do that with a 458. I mean,
You have to be a California. Any putz can get a
any
California.
putz can get a California.
Yes.
Any putz can get a used Ferrari.
Yeah.
And then, so you're supposed to start with a used Ferrari. Then you trade up to maybe a California, and then maybe you can, or maybe you trade up through.
But
the
this is
used
all
Ferraris.
Ferrari specific.
But that's Ferrari specific. So let's establish where the supercar line is. Because, all right, let's look at the history of supercars. By the way, supercar used to mean muscle car before the word muscle car came around.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So supercars had all sorts of weird definitions.
Yeah. So there's no real definition of supercar.
Right. So supercar, as you were saying, it used to be used in back in the 60s when what we call muscle cars now were referred to in the press back in the day as supercars. And you were saying that the AMC SC Rambler, the SC stands for supercar.
Yes.
I learned that from you just like 5 minutes ago.
Thank you very much.
And I was just telling you a few minutes ago that back in the Group B rallying days, those were referred to as supercars. They said, these are the new rally supercars. And so then they would say, well, how do you feel about the new supercars that you're driving? And then Walter Roll would be like, oh, it is very fast.
Well, because
That's a great Walter Roll impression.
that was a fantastic impression. In fact, I'm sure.
I was going to do a Marco Allen impression, but it would just be me scowling.
So that actually makes perfect sense because those cars, they were at a technological apex, right? These were the best engineers coming up with the best solution for cascading through the forest at high rates of speed. So if you're looking at the general supercar meaning, where is the baseline? Is it at the 458 level, or is it
It has to be higher.
than that?
458 is just a sports car. It's not just, it's great, but it is a sports car.
Well, when I wrote an article about this, I said a supercar, when a supercar passes you by, you should think that at that very moment, the driver is 1, doing some kind of design drug that you've never even heard of, 2, doing illicit acts with someone else, and 3, about to crash into a school bus full of orphans and nuns. Like, that's the feeling that a supercar should give you. That things are just going crazy, and it's not quite legal, and, all sorts of things are sort of bad in a good way, and, it's just
So killing children and nuns is bad in a good way.
But in an explosion.
Right.
Which makes it all right.
So, okay, but so you're saying that there's a villainous kind of aspect to it.
There's something
a kind
extraordinary
of
and
aspect.
theatrical and
So you would say a
fantastic
Lexus
about
LFA is not a supercar then?
Not even at all. And a lot of people think it is because there are a lot of things which make you think it's a supercar. The engine, for instance, it's built by Yamaha, and it's like it screams, and it's so fast that you have to get a special rev counter to match it, and it looks kind of cool. It's got vents in the back like a real supercar, but it's just not. You sort of see it, and it's got a Lexus badge, and it's on the street, and it looks sort of like a Supra, and it's just like a car. It's like a really good car, but it's just a car.
It's limited edition, carbon fiber loom.
But like a Countach isn't even a car. It's just like this sort of weird happening that occurs.
It has to make an impression. So there's a poser aspect that you are trying to
a supercar
assign to it.
is transcendent. It's something absolutely removed from the kind of cars that you and I and regular mortals are allowed to pilot around.
Okay, so
that actually makes sense because I was driving I've driven nice cars, and so when you drive a Gallardo around, and I had the experience of driving a Gallardo and a Ventador and a Veyron within a relatively short period of time in a couple different places, and the yeah Great to grow up to be Jalopnik editor-in-chief, kids. It's a great gig. And you know, the Gallardo people responded to, they're like, hey, that's a Gallardo, that's nice, or hey, it's a Lamborghini, cool, I've never seen any of those. You know, the Aventador people, you know, kind of snapped their heads and looked. When I was driving the Veyron, a woman, or actually I think Patrick was driving the Veyron, I was behind, a woman jumped out of her car in traffic with an iPad to take a picture of it.
Wow.
Which,
That's something.
Yeah, which is a reaction.
So, okay, but let's talk about the Veyron for a second. Because a Veyron kind of started this whole thing by being such an outrageous engineering exercise. Is that all it takes? I mean, it is batshit looking, right? It looks like an old jukebox. It's like two
Well, the
cars.
Veyron is troubling because it's definitively not in the Countach mold, because anyone can drive it, even though it's got, you know, 8,000 horsepower.
It drives like a Honda Prelude until you like step on it. Like that's the best way I could describe it, which is a weird thing to say. It's really heavy, but you know, other than that, it's very normal.
But it doesn't look normal. I mean, it has a presence to it that, to your point, says something other than, wow, I'm just driving a car.
And people who don't care about cars at all will walk up to one and like pretend to pose, so it looks like stand in front of it, so it looks like they're leaning on it. And you know, they don't know anything about it, and they just go, ooh, look at that.
So, sense of occasion.
Yeah.
All right, that's the first thing. A supercar needs a sense of occasion.
I think we can all agree
Can
on
we
that.
agree on that?
Yeah.
All right, number one,
One.
sense of occasion. So, Aventador, occasion.
Occasion.
Not a great car to drive.
I haven't
Has
really
its
stretched
moments.
its legs out. You've spent more time on the track driving it. I've just driven it around Pebble Beach, which is sort of like not the normal experience. But
Although it might be
It
closer to
actually
the
might
normal
be
Yeah,
also the normal experience that you think.
I mean, driving it on a racetrack is sort of weird because I don't know a lot of Aventador owners anyway, but I mean, I think there aren't many who take it on the racetrack. And it is a strange car to drive on the track because of the orientation of the all-wheel drive system that it has. And sometimes it feels one way, and then you take the same corner in the same way, and it feels different.
Have you ever seen a video of a Lamborghini Countach on a racetrack?
No.
yeah.
It doesn't belong. You take one look at it and you're like, this isn't right. This is not where the car belongs. Where the car belongs is like skipping over a lake. You know, it doesn't belong in
I saw that
a
movie,
track.
by the way.
And there's a reason for that, and there's a reason why supercars exist. And this goes back to the 70s, and when sort of the modern supercar ethos started. And that's when you started to have a break between what was a racing car and what was a supercar. And so you started having cars which were, you know, brutally fast, but, you know, maybe not the highest horsepower, but very low weight, and, you know, advanced aerodynamics that could never really work on the road. And then you started having cars which had, you know, even more power than the race cars that weren't necessarily as fast, you know, from a driver's perspective, but, you know, just blew everyone's minds and the way that they were designed and the way they felt. And so there was a break between sort of what was actually performance and then what was actually sort of like superness.
That's a strong point because you're right. That there is a sort of, there's a moment, and the moment is the 1970. What was the auto show where the Countach came out? It was Turin
1974,
74,
yeah.
73, whatever it was.
And it's like the Muro was sort of with that too, because
But the
that
Muro-
also never really raced. And
Yeah, cars that didn't race, but were still sought after by people who wanted to.
And this
be
is
seen
why,
in them.
from a modern perspective, it's hard to think of cars from before that era as supercars, like the Mephistopheles, because that was a racing car, and you
Right.
don't think of it doesn't quite mesh.
Okay, so going back, that's a
And
strong
this is
point,
also
though.
where people get the idea that supercars should be bad to drive, because certainly their purpose is not to be fast on track. But so you sort of have to think of something else to fit into them, and you know maybe they're supposed to be bad. And
Well, and that's why hypercars are different, because hypercars are meant to be driven on track. Like they're taking those motherfuckers to the Nürburgring for a reason.
Right.
Right.
Bleep
Well,
that, but-
Nürburgring, yeah, so.
And that all
Wait a
started
minute.
with the F1, because, the McLaren F1, because that was sort of breaking the mold again, because it was sort of this extravagant car, and it was made out of carbon fiber, and the seat was in the middle, and it had this crazy V12. But then it went and won Le Mans.
But that's the thing, is it was developed from F1 technology, right? So it was a racing car built for the street. Here's another thing, homologation, just to add to what you were talking about. homologation is a different category, right? So you're talking about like
Which is why we also don't think of Group B supercars as being supercars because again,
Yeah,
they're
an
racing
an
and
RS200 is totally a supercar in every way, but no one thinks of it as a supercar when it drives by because it looks like a Volkswagen Beetle.
exactly. I mean, Lancia, Audi. You look at these are sort of economy cars, or at least they're everyday cars. that
Escort
were
RS
just-
Cosworth looks like an economy car.
Right. So, homologation cars. So, looking at the McLaren F1, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a supercar? I would say, to your definition, it's not. But I can't imagine a world in which a McLaren F1 is not a supercar.
I know, isn't that really hard? But don't you think that, like Gordon Murray, when he was setting out to design that car, he didn't say, I'm going to make a supercar and it's going to be loud and crazy and, people are going to look at it and it's just going to blow their minds. No, he was like, I'm going to make a sports car better than anyone else has ever done it before. And it just so happened that ended up being so amazing that people call it a supercar.
Right.
Oh man, that's rough. I don't know what I believe anymore. I came here ready to fight and disagree with Raphael, but I don't believe anything is a supercar.
So here's a question for you then. If a supercar is only about the occasion, right? And it's about the break from motorsports, the division between motorsports and sports cars that are about the theater of sports cars, then what's the lineage from the Lamborghini Countach to now? Because haven't there been other cars that have merged, like the McLaren F1, that have merged, that have brought motorsports back together with a supercar construct?
Right. And hopefully, I have my fingers crossed that we'll end up seeing sort of P1s and LaFerraris and 918s doing interesting stuff. But I think really...
Wait, but by interesting stuff, you mean going around the Nürburgring really quickly?
I mean, racing competitively in FIA-sanctioned series.
Which would be interesting to have that's another thing.
Tune in for this week's Shakedown.
This is really...
Tune in to last month's Shakedown.
It would be really good to see these cars proven on a racetrack. So that would reconcile what you brought up before. So it would be a sense of occasion, but then also motorsports prowess at the same time.
But it would be a bit like seeing sort of a foot race between clowns.
Really? I don't think so.
I mean, I'm not to say that, but I mean, there would be more serious motorsports events going on. You would have, Audi and Porsche would sit there very stern-faced with their LMP1 and sort of get things done and really advance technology. And then there would also be, a supercar class or hypercar class, or whatever you want to call it, that would just be like flames and, things happening.
Well, again, so there should be a GT1 class again in Le Mans. So this is the thing. It's interesting, just not to go down too much of a road, but this is one thing that I miss because in my sort of formative
GT1
years,
was
there was
great.
GT1, and GT1 had the coolest shit imaginable.
It really did.
So, but it was still GT, bringing GT and prototype together.
Yep. So the question is sort of we sort of get back to the question is, what is a supercar really?
Again, wait a minute.
And we can all agree that things like the Lamborghini Aventador is a supercar because it just has all of them. It's silly in a way, and it's not really good for anything other than either going really fast or it's sort of going really slow around a nightclub.
Wow. It's not really good at that, by the way.
Is it
the
not?
transmission is not...
Yeah, it doesn't like to go slow.
Does not like to go
so,
lurking around like nightclubs.
So like a Zonda we would say is still pretty much a supercar.
I would definitely say it. It's built by like some random dude who's got
Wait a minute.
such a story.
No. So you know what? Like, maybe you can convince me logically that the Zonda is not a hypercar or a supercar of the highest order. But I can't help when I see it. You have the sense of occasion, right? You've got the sound, you've got the theater, and you've got the technology. I mean, the technology may not be necessarily. I mean, the engine is pretty high tech, but maybe it's not the highest tech. But the way the body is built. I mean, it's a.
No, sure. I'm definitely agreeing with you that that's a supercar.
Well, and then
Okay.
I think that maybe then you kind of just a little bit touched on the ultimate definition of what a supercar is, which is that you can feel it in your pants, in your underwear.
So that's maybe that's the.
That's like you.
There. oh dear.
Supercar.
Supercar.
Absolutely.
All right, so then that brings the final question, which is, should the term hypercar exist? Do we need the term hypercar to define the highest level? So the Koenigsegg's and, you know, maybe the P1s and the LaFerraris. I mean, are these hypercars, or is supercar enough to encompass all of them?
I think a hypercar is definitely something that needs to exist, because car makers made supercars, but they didn't really, these sort of like ridiculous, expensive, technological hybrid experiments are sort of so different and so new. And the idea of, like, imagine if you gave someone like Christian and you gave somebody like Horatio like 4,000 engineers and like billions of dollars and just said, go to town.
Right.
And that's why I think hypercar exists, which is why hypercar, we think that, supercar, maybe it's been used a lot, but we sort of, in the modern context, think of it as a Miura was like the first supercar, really.
Yeah.
I think, maybe in that sense, the Veyron was the first hypercar, and that was the first time I'd heard the word hypercar used.
Yeah.
Because, Ferdinand, said, let's just make something crazy. And so maybe what we consider a hypercar now won't seem like a hypercar in a few years. Maybe it'll be something crazier than the P1, if that's imaginable.
Well, I think to your point, and I think I agree with you, and here's why, that the level of performance of sports cars in general has gone so into such into areas where we hadn't thought that they could go before. Where you have a sports car into the 200s, right? You have cars that anyone can drive really fast and well, and they're good handling cars, and generally we would have considered them sports cars, except for the fact that they get from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds, and they're not necessarily a Porsche. A Porsche Turbo can do that, and a GTR can do that, and those aren't supercars. But there are supercars like the Aventador that can do that and have the sense of occasion too. So then you have the hypercar, which is really the high tech and can perform at an even higher level. So I think you do need another tier. What do you say?
I obviously disagree.
Okay, you obviously disagree. And very quickly, why do you disagree?
I think the things that you are describing as hypercars, sort of unbelievably high tech and unbelievably high priced, are the things that are the very same things which define a supercar. And it just so happens that we just have progressed a lot, and we want to call them something different, but really, when you think about it, they're not that different at all.
Well,
How do you argue with that guy?
I don't know. I'm not going to argue with him anymore.
Yeah,
He's freaking me out.
I've got all sorts of other stuff I want to talk about.
Raphael Orlove, again, writer from Jalopnik. Matt Hardigree, thanks for coming on. Again, editor-in-chief of Jalopnik.com. And this is it. So if you want to contribute, and I think you should, because we haven't completely answered this here, and I don't know whether it can be answered, but there's a really good thread going on Facebook.com/DriveTV. So go there right now and tell us what you think. What is a supercar, and should the term hypercar exist? And actually, what do you want to see next from, what's the next level of sports car?
Super hypercars.
Super hypercars.
What about ultra cars?
Ultra
Ultra cars. No, you're right. I have
that's so
actually
good.
heard that. I've heard ultra cars.
Ultra cars sounds like an aborted 1982 cartoon Saturday morning.
Yes, exactly.
Saturday morning
Exactly.
cartoon.
Anyway, that's After Drive for today. We'll see you guys next week. And don't forget, /drive.tv, @drive on Twitter, Facebook.com/drivetv, and tell us what you think. We'll see you guys later.